Let's continue our discussion about the state. Victor, maybe we should talk about the deficit.
What's a deficit, and is South Africa running a deficit?
We're running a huge fiscal deficit. The deficit simply means that the Minister of Finance is collecting so much money and is spending much more. And the difference between the two is quite a substantial amount of money. We're talking about nearly 200 billion rand, which is equal to about 5% to the South African economy. So yes, I'm afraid to say, South Africa is running a huge fiscal deficit.
But that doesn't sound good. I can't go and spend money I don't have. How does that work?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happens to the Minister of Finance. He spends more than what he gets in, and if an individual does that, what happens? He will go deeper and deeper into your overdraft. Fortunately for us, the overdraft of the state, or the state's debt burden, is a relative size relative to the rest of the economy. If the economy keeps on growing, it is okay. What is more important, however, is on what the money is being spent. If I borrow money to go on holiday, for example, it's not a good idea. But if I borrow money to buy capital goods, to buy a house, for example, is not a bad idea. Unfortunately, in the case of South Africa, the state is a significant dis-saver. And if you are a dis-saver, you're a destroyer of capital.
But where does the minister borrow the money from?
Well, we know now that the state spends more than what it gets in by way of taxes. And the Minister of Finance has got a whole plan, and he borrows this money in the financial markets. He can borrow the money, for example, from a pension fund. It's called the capital market borrowing. That's usually long-term borrowing. Or he can go abroad, and he can ask the Americans if he can borrow from them. Or he can borrow money in the money markets, like, for example, the treasury market. Or he can sell some state assets in order to fund this fiscal deficit. So I'm afraid if you have a pension fund, chances are quite good that you are lending money to the Minister of Finance. And that, by the way, is the lowest risk investment in the South African economy.
So, can a state go bankrupt?
States can't really go bankrupt the way that individuals or companies go bankrupt. A company, if you go bankrupt, for instance, they're going to take your house and sell it on an auction. If the state goes bankrupt, they're not going to take the Voortrekker monument and sell that, for instance. But certainly what can happen, states can default on their debt. And it's happened all the time. Look at the Greeks, for example, and it's happened in the past as well. But technically, states don't really go bankrupt, although they quite often default on their debt. Next week, we stay with economic policy.